Hi everyone, today we are going to take a look at the subject creative writing for SEA examination, narrative essay writing. Now I just want to remind people that narrative essay writing is done from the primary school level to the secondary school level or the high school level. So it means that this tutorial can benefit anyone who needs a little push or a little more idea as to how to write a good narrative essay. Okay, so we're going to look at it in detail. So basically the elements of a narrative essay, all essays should have a setting, it should have a character, and it should have a plot. Now these are three basic elements of a narrative essay. We would look in detail at each aspect of these elements. So we have setting. This is the description of where the story occurs. The place would include the day, time, weather. Try to create a visual of the atmosphere of the scene. This is a place where the character would be located and a conflict will occur. In other words, when you introduce your setting, it must be where the character would be located and the conflict will occur. So for your setting, if you are aware or if you had planned before that your conflict will occur at a beach setting, or it will occur at school or at home or in the park or wherever it will occur, please do not start your story introducing a setting that is far away or getting prepared to go to that setting. Try to have your introduction of setting where your conflict will occur. Character. This is a person, animal, or thing. You should have one main character who is physically described with a unique or interesting quality. The character must also have a personality described by the use of actions and dialogue. Okay, so a character doesn't always have to be a person. A character can also be an animal or a thing. So you can create anything, whether it be a fantasy-like character, an alien, or a zombie, or anything of that nature, a thing. An animal can be a character like a pet, okay, or a person, right? You should have one main character. Sometimes students get carried away in their use of character in that they include characters and they name characters after people that they actually know. I want to let people know that this would limit your creativity. You should also always think of a unique character and give that person a unique name. Okay, so that your character will have a personality as well. So your character should be physically described and your character should have a personality. How do you describe the personality of the character? The personality of the character is usually described by their action. If their action is angry, if it is kind gestures, etc., and the dialogue, the way that the character will speak will indicate what type of personality the character has. You can also indicate what type of personality the character has by use of adjectives as well. So we also have the plot. As we said, the plot is a very important aspect of or element of your story writing or your narrative essay writing. So we have different ideas of plot so that you can get or use whichever idea would connect with you. So our first idea of what a plot should be. There should be an event, incident, or obstacle where the main character tries to resolve the conflict or problem. The reader must be able to identify the highest moment of interest, also called the climax. There must be a resolution during which time the main character vows to make some change because of the incident. This is also called the theme or moral. So the first idea when you think about plot is that we must have in our plot, basically, as the words are highlighted, a conflict, right? Which is a problem that the character would be trying to resolve. We must have, in that conflict, we must have a climax, meaning that our conflict shouldn't be based on one idea that would be boring, so to speak. It should increase in excitement to the point where the character reaches a position of great danger, of great excitement, of great anger, etc. Okay, so that therefore then we can come back down to our resolution, which is our solution to the problem or to the conflict. Okay, so let us take a look at another idea of plot, as teachers would also go through in schools. Okay, so we have here a diagram format of a plot, which again I am reminding you all is an important element of story writing, that you follow the plot accordingly. Okay, so basically, firstly, as you see here in the diagram, we have the introduction, right? The introduction should have setting, character, and background. Those three things the introduction should have. It can be placed in one paragraph, right? Then after that, you would have to introduce the conflict, which is also called your rising action. So your tone or your atmosphere begins to change. So in the beginning of your story, you introduce your setting, your character, your background, and then you move to introducing your conflict, which creates a rising action heading towards the third aspect of your plot, which is your climax, the most exciting part of the story. Then we would continue to move down to our resolution of conflict, which is also called our falling action. So our resolution of conflict is a combination of your conflict and your resolution, where the problem is beginning to be solved, leading to a final resolution where a lesson is learned and there is a moral. Okay, a moral or a lesson that is learned by the character. All right, so this is another format for plot. Right, so plot 3, we have conflict and resolution. We're going to take a look at what is a conflict. A conflict is a problem which the main character encounters. This would include the rising action and the climax. The ending of the conflict will be the falling action. So again, I am reminding students that the conflict will be a problem which the main character encounters. Resolution, a description of how the conflict or problem was resolved. A moral to the story or a lesson learned. Okay, so the resolution will occur after the conflict. Okay, meaning that it would be how the conflict or the problem was resolved. So we must have these elements to the story. We cannot have a conflict alone and no resolution. And some students even go so far as to write a story without a conflict, which is totally wrong. Okay, because the basis of writing the story is to include a plot which includes a conflict and would lead to resolution. Now we have different styles of narrative essay. Firstly, we have one that is very familiar, which is the chronological essay. The story is written in time order. First event leads to another, and so on. This is what basically students learn at the primary school level and even at the high school level. So firstly, you introduce your character, as we said before, your setting, etc., as the one of the plot outline. Then you have your rising action, your climax, your falling action, and your resolution. Okay, so another one, however, would involve more technicality. So students can experiment with what is called a flashback. The story begins at the resolution, and then all the events are recalled as it occurred. So basically, what you would surmise to be the resolution or how the story would end based on your planning, you would try to start your story, a sentence, with that. Then now you move back to your chronological order. I'm going to repeat that. So you would start with your resolution, a sentence from your resolution, or how you suppose that your story will end, and then you will move back to your chronological order. Okay, giving a certain level of interest or adding a certain level of interest to your story. Now, time shift is one of the more difficult methods to pull off, but if you are able to pull off flashback or time shift, I believe it will add creativity to your story. It will show that you understand technicality in writing, and it will eventually add to your marks. So the time shift, the story begins at the climax, and then all the events are recalled as it occurred. So again, the climax is a different part of the story. If we go back to our diagram on plot, the climax would have been at the middle of the story, the highest point of the story, where the character faces the most danger or the most excitement, right? So you should take a sentence that you suppose that will be from that aspect of your story and actually start your story with that aspect, and then go back again to your chronological order. Okay, so flashback and time shifts, it is quite similar. However, flashback has your resolution first, basically in one or two sentences alone, and then you go back to your chronological order. Time shift is similar in that aspect. You have one or two sentences from your climax, and then you go back to your chronological order. Okay, adding intrigue, excitement, and a different type of element of starting your story. Instead of starting your story with words like one day or it was a bright and sunny day, you are trying to experiment with different story starters. Now, one idea is that sometimes they actually give you sentences to work with. They say include the following sentence in the story. So therefore, you can actually, depending on how the sentence looks or reads, if it reads like if it is very exciting and that it could be used for a time shift or a flashback, right? You can use that sentence and then move back to your chronological order. I hope that you understand styles of narrative essay. So we go into another element of story writing, which students need to consider as well in writing stories. Because if you look at television shows, movies, or you read books, novels, etc., storybooks, all stories have a mood. It will evoke emotion in the reader, the person who is listening to a story that is told verbally or looking at a story on television, etc. And you now, as well as a writer, for this brief period of time you are writing this story, you have to also consider what mood do you want to evoke in your reader. So you must add mood to your story. The mood refers to the emotional setting of the story, created by the atmosphere and tone of the writer. The atmosphere and mood of the story can change as the story progresses. The story can start with a calm mood and change to a scary or exciting mood. Be creative in your moods. Not all stories would be sad. You can have a comic mood as well. So some students totally neglect the comic mood. They always go towards either the scary or the sad, etc. Okay, but it is up to you to know how comfortable you are to explore with different story ideas. Okay, so mood of story is important in your writing. Method of description. Our first method of description would be imagery, or what we sometimes call sensory details. Use of the five senses in describing. Used mainly for setting and atmosphere. So when you think about your story, you would have, again we mentioned, you would have your character, and you would have your setting, and you would have your plot. Okay, so your character would have a method of being described. However, your setting will also have a method of being described, mainly used by sensory details. So we can use our five senses. We can consider, what do we smell? We are in a haunted house. What do we smell? Okay, what do we hear? Clanging noises, creaking boards. Okay, so that would be sense of hearing. What do we see? What do we see? What colors, what shapes? As I entered the green door, as I entered the broken door, right? As I walked through the cobweb room, I felt cobwebs all over me. Okay, so your sense of touch. Okay, so you try to use more of your senses so that the examiner would appreciate that you are using these methods of description, sensory details. You also have your second method of description, which is figurative devices. Figurative devices is something that is becoming more and more popular throughout the SEA examination, not only in creative writing but also in your language arts for your comprehension skills. Now these are just two, but you can use more figurative devices in your writing. Some students, I have seen students use metaphors and personification, right? But I would tell students that you can do that if you can, but you would get marks for using basic similes and onomatopoeias. Okay, so simile and onomatopoeia are the easiest to include in your essay. So similes would be, I ran through the door as fast as a bullet. Okay, as fast as a speeding bullet. So basically a simile is easy to use. You can try your best to include similes, at least 2 or 3 in your essays. Onomatopoeia, right? The clanging noise from the distant room. Clanging is an onomatopoeia, right? I heard bang, bang, bang. A constant bang, bang, bang. That would be an onomatopoeia, where the word actually sounds as it is pronounced. Okay, so try to use figurative devices because you will be marked on these things. Some students, you tell them these things and they totally ignore it because they feel they are not capable of doing it. But writing is something that you have to start taking chances and explore your writing skills, and that is the way that you will get better. You explore, you use more figurative devices, more expressions, etc., and you will just keep getting better. Third method of description would be expression of feelings. So I want to backtrack a little bit. Remember, I said that you will have different methods of description for different elements of your story. So for your setting, you had sensory details. For your character, remember, you have to remember your character, because your character will evoke your mood as well. So your atmosphere or your setting would evoke a mood as well as your character. So expression of feelings, as your character performs actions, because it is important that your character perform actions, because they will mark you on that. Okay, as your character perform actions, your character will have feelings. Your feelings can be sadness, happiness, excitement, comic, anger, fear, etc., as some which may be used to give the story itself a feeling which the character is surrounded by. So it is important, don't just have the character perform actions and not actually use expressions of feelings to say, as the character is entering this scary haunted house, how did the character feel? Right? How did the character feel? Use an expression of feeling. So we have use of direct speech. This is quite difficult for some students. Some students, when they get it really good. So this is the rules I'm going to read through for you. Right? New paragraphs when there is a change in speaker. So in other words, what I say, there cannot be, or there must not be, two speakers in the same paragraph. Two different speakers cannot speak in the same paragraph. If Joe is saying something and then Dan decides to say something, then you should go, no matter how short the paragraph is, you should go to another line. Now again, you would be marked on including direct speech, because your character has to speak and perform actions. So if your character, SEA, is saying that your character has to speak and perform actions, definitely it will mean that you must include direct speech in your essays. Okay, so you must have quotation marks including spoken words, capitalization of first letter of first word in each quoted sentence. So the beginning of each quoted sentence must start with a capital letter. The use of punctuation marks, commas, period, question marks, or exclamation marks to separate quoted words from the rest of the sentence. Okay, so we will take a look at an example of direct speech. "Where is my book?" cried Simon. Now, if we notice that where started with a capital W, we also started with a open quotation mark. Before the closed quotation mark, we also had a question mark. You can have a comma or a full stop depending on what the sentence sounds like or what you decide to do. And we have a closed quotation mark. We also have cried Simon. Okay, instead of just saying said, 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 said. Right? Now someone else is going to speak. Father is going to speak. Father is going to speak. So therefore, we have moved to another line. Okay, whether your choice of moving to another paragraph is to skip a line or what have you, or indent, you do that. Okay, so if your style of writing your paragraph is to indent, then you go on to another paragraph and you indent your work and you start. If it is that you skip a line, then you skip a line. Again, if you notice, we have a capital L, we have open quotation mark, we have another punctuation mark here. This time we are using a comma, and we close off the speech with a close quotation mark. So look behind the sofa. I saw it there this morning. Replied. So again, we did not use the word said. We used the word replied his father. Then we go to another paragraph to continue. Simon ran to the chair and looked behind it frantically, but did not see his book. He became impatient and once more screamed, "Where is my book? It is not there." So we have used other forms of punctuation marks to get our point across. Again, I'm trying to show you that we had started the actual speech with an open quotation mark and a capital letter, and we close it off with a closed quotation mark. Okay, so here as well, when Dad was going to speak, Dad is going to speak now. We did not continue in the same paragraph. That would have been wrong. We went to a new paragraph. "I don't know," replied Dad. And look at all the punctuations that are being used. Open quotation mark, capital I, comma, close quotation mark, comma again, open quotation mark. And we might wonder why we have a common A here. A common A here is because Dad is still speaking and we use the comma here. So this is, I'm trying to show you as well different variations in use of direct speech. So "I don't know," replied Dad, "and I can't understand why you are annoyed. You must be more careful with your stuff." And that was the final thing. So we had a full stop and we closed off with a close quotation mark. Okay, so basically those are some of your rules with use of example of how to use direct speech. And direct speech actually adds quality to your writing. It adds a lot of quality to your writing. However, in using direct speech, some students get carried away and write half of their story with direct speech. You cannot do that. You cannot get that carried away. Okay, so possibly this amount of direct speech is enough to get you through to getting a decent mark for your SEA examination. Now we're going to recap on what I call story map. Now this might be something that is very useful to you, because all the things that we said basically is breaking up the story into different parts, and a story is one of the most complex pieces of writing, right? It is more complex than a lot of other writing because you have so many aspects of it. You have your character, you have your setting, you have your plot, you have your mood, you have your atmosphere, you have direct speech, you have all these different things that you have. You have expressions of feeling, you have sensory details, you have, oh my god, there's a lot. But the story map sort of breaks it down. It breaks it down into 5 parts. 5 parts might actually give you a 5-paragraph essay, which could be a fairly good essay for your SEA exam. Some students push for more, but we have to consider if you can push for 6. I do not fault students. I am not the type of teacher to fault students for writing 6 paragraphs, but I would caution students that if you are a slow writer, a slow thinker, if you have problems with time management, then you should not do so. I do not encourage students to write a 4-paragraph essay or a 3-paragraph essay. Okay, that I think it is that you are setting up yourself to possibly make under 15 marks. So you should try your best to possibly experiment more with the 5-paragraph essay. Now, again, I'm saying this would be ideal for you all to possibly write down or try to get it down, or you can also always view over the entire tutorial, right, and see how all the parts that we spoke about previously connects with this. So your first part, start story with introduction of the setting where the conflict occurs. Introduce the main character of the story and develop the background. This is what you will do in your first paragraph. So basically, why I call it a story map. A map is something that gives you directions of where to go, right? So this is giving you directions. So I'm reading over the first one again. So how do you start your story? Start your story with introduction of the setting where the conflict will occur. And if you go back to setting, you should know that setting should include your day, time, place, weather. Okay? If it is that it is occurring in a particular area, I encourage students to name your area. If it is in a park, give the park an interesting name. Okay? If it will occur at a beach, give the beach a name. Right? Don't just say at the park. Try to be creative, because it is creative writing. Introduce the main character of the story and develop your background. Like, say what were you doing, right? So in other words, say what you were doing, something realistic that will eventually lead to your conflict without actually getting into your conflict in your first paragraph. Your conflict should not be in your first paragraph unless you, for some reason, you decide to do your flashback or your time shift. Okay, now the second paragraph is where you introduce conflict by second paragraph of the story. So you introduce your conflict. So your character is now getting into some sort of problem. Okay, some sort of problem they are getting into. So this is your rising action, right? So the third part is you develop your conflict to reach a climax, meaning that your character had gotten into a problem and now this problem is really bad, really terrible, that we need to find some sort of resolution. So we start by our fourth paragraph, we start resolving the conflict. We are still in the conflict, but we start trying to find ways to get out of the conflict. And our fifth paragraph, we resolve the conflict, leading to a moral or a lesson that is learned. So if you had gone into this haunted house that we keep talking about, then the lesson that you should learn is probably the house was not haunted, it was just old, right? Possibly that you should not have gone in there because this house does not belong to you, okay? And you don't just enter strangers' homes, etc. So what was the story learned? Okay, so this story map hopefully should also help you to configure everything in a nutshell and also apply everything else that we discussed earlier on. Now the aim is that of this tutorial is that if you actually follow everything that was said, that you should be able to score a very high mark. Now of course, considering that you have you will also be marked on your grammar and punctuation. Okay, I would also do another tutorial for narrative essay writing for primary school level in terms of the marking as well, because at the end of the marking, a lot of you see your teachers write CLOG. CLOG would be basically your content. Okay, your content should be everything that a story should have, all the elements. You must have all the elements. So content is marked rather hard. Okay, your content, your language would be the use of all the different descriptions that we talk about, sensory details, etc. Imagery, sensory details, figurative devices, expressions of feelings. Your organization would be use of the story map, okay, can assist with your organization, right? And then your grammar, well, that would be something that if some of you have problems with spelling, etc., you have to try to work on it. You have to try to work on things like punctuation, etc., by going over your work and asking yourself, how can you do better, right? If your teacher had made corrections before, then you try to correct your own work after writing your essay, using old essays to correct new essays. So you don't just dump your essays, you actually try to keep them so that they would be of use to you. Okay, so I hope that this tutorial, as always, is useful to you and you would be able to use it to write future essays. We would have more tutorials. I have so much more information on narrative essay writing to share with you, and I will try to do as many tutorials as possible in the upcoming weeks. So happy writing, right? Be creative and try to always impress the reader.